So welcome back to Mammalian Anatomy at Keuka College. Today we're going to continue our conversation about Chapter 12, the nervous system, and we're going to start talking about Part 3, the gross anatomy of the nervous system. So in Part 2, we focused on histology and we looked at the nervous tissue. So essentially in Part 2, we focused on what the nervous tissue would look like under a light microscope. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on what the nervous system would look like if we dissected the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. So, like, what would it be if we did that type of procedure? In this particular video, we're going to focus on gray and white matter of the central nervous system. And when we actually dissect the brain and the spinal cord, we'll see that there are two distinct regions and they differ based on color, and that's how we can identify them. But they also differ based on what structures are located there and the functions of those regions. So let's talk about it together. So there's going to be gray and white matter. White matter is going to contain myelinated axons and neuroglia. And because the myelinated axons are located there, there's going to be a lot of oligodendrocytes wrapping their plasma membranes around them, forming the myelin sheath. Because the plasma membrane of these oligodendrocytes is fatty, it's rich in phospholipids, this is going to impart its color to the white matter. So white matter is white because it has the myelin sheath. It almost has like the color of butter, so it's a very fatty structure, and it's going to have that kind of white color to it. So what is the function of white matter? So being that there are myelinated axons in white matter, what's going to happen is those axons are going to carry information through the central nervous system, and it's going to carry information to different regions of the central nervous system. So if we're looking at the spinal cord, for example, the white matter is going to carry information up and down the spinal cord to and from the brain. So carry that information long distances. And in the brain, what will happen is the white matter will connect different regions of the brain so that the brain can create a holistic picture of our internal and external environment. Just a note on vocabulary. We've talked about bundles of axons in the central nervous system now and in the peripheral nervous system, but we use different vocabulary to describe them. A bundle of axons in the central nervous system is called a tract, while a bundle of axons in the peripheral nervous system is called a nerve. It's essentially a very similar structure. It's just we give it different vocabulary depending on what division of the nervous system we're talking about. So just be aware of that as we move forward. Let's talk about gray matter. Oops, it looks like I used the American and the English version of the word gray, but it's essentially the same. Let's talk about what gray matter does. Gray matter is going to contain cell bodies, unmyelinated axons, and neuroglia. So when I'm talking about unmyelinated axons, mainly it's going to contain interneurons that are going to be responsible for integrating information and helping with neural circuitry. And it's also going to contain cell bodies. Because it contains these two structures, the major function of gray matter is to allow for nerves to synapse and integrate and process information. So, for example, in the spinal cord, the gray matter is going to allow for integration between sensory and motor neurons, sometimes using an interneuron to help us out. And it will allow the central nervous system to understand those stimuli coming in and make a decision on what is the proper motor function that has to be sent out, or a motor decision that has to be sent out. So it's a lot of integrating and processing information. Why is gray matter called gray? So because the axons are unmyelinated, there isn't going to be as much of that lipid-rich plasma membrane of the oligodendrocytes present there. And because of that, it's going to have a bit of a gray color to it. Also, there are special structures in the cell body called missile bodies that can impart a gray color to this area as well. Again, just a note about vocabulary in the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system. There is a collection of cell bodies, and if we describe a collection of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, we call it a ganglion, while in the central nervous system, we call it a nucleus. So again, just depending on where we are, we're going to call these terms different things. So in a nutshell, white matter is going to contain myelinated axons and is going to be responsible for carrying information long distances, while gray matter is going to contain cell bodies and unmyelinated axons and be responsible for integrating and processing information. So now we kind of know what these different regions are and what they contain. Let's look at how they are structured in the brain versus the spinal cord. So here what we're doing is we're taking a frontal cross-section of the brain, and you'll see that there are two major regions, the gray matter and white matter. The gray matter within the brain is going to be more on the my apologies. The gray matter in the brain is going to be more on the outside, on the surface of the brain. And so the surface of the brain is going to have those cell bodies and those synapses that are responsible for processing information. So gray matter will be on the outside of the brain. White matter, on the other hand, is going to be on the inside of the brain. It's going to be deeper, if we're using anatomical terms. And so this is where the axons will be located. So just to think about kind of how this would work functionally, the axons would be able to travel from one area of the brain to another, connecting the different regions of the brain throughout the white matter. And it will be able to also cross the hemispheres going from one side to another. So information will be carried long distances using the myelinated axons through the white matter. So this will be more of a connecting structure. Another thing is, so once that information kind of travels across from one region to the brain to another, there'll be synapsing between neurons in the gray matter. And this is where the information will be processed and the communication will occur here. A cool feature to allow for there to be more gray matter in our brain is that our brain is highly folded on its surface. And so this folding increases the surface area that we have for the gray matter and we have for processing. So we have lots of folds, so that makes us really smart because of that. It's interesting, other organisms such as mice don't have this level of folding. Mice actually have a smooth surface to their brain. So remember, for the brain, the white matter is on the inside and the gray matter is on the outside. This is actually flipped when we are looking at the spinal cord. The white matter is going to actually be on the outside and the gray matter will be on the inside. So the tracks or the bundle of axons that are going up and down the spinal cord will be actually going across the outside of the spinal cord. The gray matter, on the other hand, is going to be on the inside, and this is where some processing is going to occur. And when we talk about reflexes, we're going to talk about how these synapses and processing will occur within this gray matter. But it's really beautiful because the gray matter in the spinal cord is very much a butterfly shape, and this butterfly shape will change its structure depending on where we are in the spinal cord. So that concludes our discussion of gray and white matter. I would like you to be able to compare and contrast the structures and functions of gray and white matter and be able to label them on the brain and spinal cord. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day. Be good to yourselves. Bye-bye.